The envelope sat on my kitchen table, its official university seal mocking me as the morning light streamed through the blinds. Final payment notice was stamped in bold red letters across the front. I'd been accepted to my dream school 3 months ago, and now, just weeks before I was supposed to leave, everything was falling apart. My mother had promised me for years that she'd been saving for my education. "Don't worry about it, Ellie," she'd say whenever I brought up college costs. "I've got it all under control." But the Instagram photos of her on that luxury cruise ship with her new boyfriend told a different story entirely. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's contact information. The betrayal burned in my chest like acid. Just yesterday, I discovered the truth. The college fund that was supposed to secure my future had been emptied to fund her 3-week Mediterranean getaway. When confronted, she had simply shrugged and said, "I worked hard for this, Ellie. You can take out loans like everyone else." 22 years of being her daughter, and I never felt so disposable. My hands shook as I set my phone down. I had less than 24 hours to figure out how to save my future. "You look like you've seen a ghost," said my roommate Jade as she entered our small apartment kitchen. Her dark curls were piled messily on top of her head, and despite the early hour, she was already dressed for her shift at the coffee shop. We'd been friends since freshman year of high school, bound together by our shared determination to escape our small town. "Worse," I replied, sliding the notice toward her. "My mom spent my college fund. All of it. The university is going to give away my spot if I don't make this payment by tomorrow." Jade's eyes widened. "She did what?" "Apparently, I'm supposed to just take out loans. But that's—" Jade stopped herself, clearly searching for words that wouldn't make me feel worse. "That's not fair. That money was for you." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, apparently her 3-week cruise with Elliot was more important than my entire future." "Elliot? The guy she's been dating for 6 months?" "5. I corrected, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten. She kept saying she deserved a break after raising me alone, as if I was some burden she had to endure. The unfairness of it all was almost too much to bear. For years, I'd watched my mother work as an executive assistant at a law firm, steadily climbing the ladder. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. When she told me she was setting aside money for college, I believed her. I'd worked my ass off to get a partial scholarship to Westlake University, taking advanced classes, joining clubs, working part-time jobs, all to reduce the financial burden. And now, with just weeks to go before the fall semester, I was facing the possibility of losing it all. "We're going to figure this out," Jade said, her voice firm. She sat down across from me, determination etched into her features. "There has to be a way." "I've already applied for every scholarship I could find," I said, feeling defeated. "And without my mom's financial information, I can't even apply for most need-based aid." My mother had always been controlling about money, insisting on handling all the financial aspects of my college applications herself. Now I understood why. "What about your dad?" Jade asked carefully. She knew this was a sensitive subject. My father had left when I was 3, supposedly unable to handle the responsibilities of parenthood. My mother rarely spoke about him, except to remind me that men always leave when things get tough. The few times I'd tried to find him online had yielded nothing. I wouldn't even know how to contact him, I admitted. And even if I could, I doubt he'd suddenly want to pay for the daughter he abandoned. Jade squeezed my hand. "Don't give up yet. Let's think this through." My phone buzzed with a text. It was from my mother. "Are you still being dramatic? Elliot and I are going out for brunch. We need to talk about your attitude." The audacity nearly took my breath away. I showed Jade the message, and her expression hardened. "She's meeting Elliot for brunch? Where?" "Probably Rosemary's. It's her favorite." "Get dressed," Jade said, standing up with sudden purpose. "We're going to confront her." Fear and anticipation coursed through me. I already tried talking to her. She doesn't care. "But she might care about what other people think," Jade pointed out. "If you confront her in public with witnesses." It was manipulative, perhaps even cruel, but I was desperate. "And some small," Hurt part of me wanted my mother to feel even a fraction of the embarrassment and betrayal I was experiencing. Okay, I agreed, standing up. Let's do it. An hour later, Jade and I were walking into Rosemary's, an upscale breakfast spot downtown. The hostess greeted us with a practiced smile. Table for two. Actually, I said, scanning the restaurant, I see my mother over there. We'll join her. Before the hostess could respond, I was moving through the restaurant, Jade close behind. My mother sat in a corner booth, laughing at something Elliot had said. She looked carefree, radiant even, in a new outfit I'd never seen before. Elliot, with his salt and pepper hair and tailored shirt, looked every bit the successful businessman my mother had described. Neither of them noticed me until I was standing right at their table. Ellie, my mother's smile faded, replaced by confusion and annoyance. What are you doing here? I got your text, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. You said we needed to talk about my attitude. Elliot shifted uncomfortably. Caroline, maybe I should give you two some privacy. No, my mother said quickly, reaching for his hand. This won't take long. Ellie's just being difficult about some financial arrangements for school. Difficult? I repeated, feeling a surge of anger. Is that what you call it when your mother spends your entire college fund on a luxury cruise without telling you? Elliot's eyebrows shot up, and he looked at my mother with surprise. That's not, my mother began, but I cut her off. You told me for years that you were saving for my education. I worked so hard to get that scholarship, to make it easier on you. And then, 3 weeks before I'm supposed to leave, I find out you've spent it all. And your solution is for me to take out massive loans. A couple at a nearby table had stopped eating to watch our exchange. My mother noticed too, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Ellie, you're making a scene, she hissed. This is not appropriate. What's not appropriate is stealing your daughter's future, Jade interjected, her voice quiet but sharp. My mother glared at her. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when my best friend's education is at stake, Jade replied evenly. Elliot cleared his throat. Caroline, is this true? You spent Ellie's college money on our trip? My mother's expression turned defensive. It wasn't just for the trip. And besides, it was my money. I earned it. You promised it to me, I said, fighting back tears. You made me believe I could count on you. Life is full of disappointments, Ellie, my mother said coldly. It's time you learned that. Her callousness stunned me into silence. It was as if the woman sitting before me was a stranger, not the mother who had once bandaged my scraped knees and celebrated my achievements. How had I never seen this side of her before? Elliot looked increasingly uncomfortable. Caroline, I had no idea. You told me the trip was a reward you'd been saving for. It was, she insisted. I've spent 22 years raising a child on my own. Don't I deserve something for myself? Not at the expense of your daughter's future, Elliot said, surprising me with his directness. He turned to me, his expression apologetic. Ellie, I honestly didn't know about this. Your mother told me you had a full scholarship. I have a partial scholarship, I clarified, still trying to process that Elliot might actually be on my side. It covers about half. The rest was supposed to come from the fund my mom had been saving in since I was little. My mother's face was a storm of emotions, anger, embarrassment, and something that looked almost like fear. You're making me sound like some kind of monster, she said. I'm your mother. I've given you everything. Except the one thing you promised me, I replied, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. My future. A long, tense silence followed. Other diners had given up any pretense of not listening to our confrontation. The hostess hovered nearby, clearly debating whether to intervene. I think, Elliot said finally, his tone measured, that we need to find a solution here. Caroline, we need to make this right. My mother stared at him in disbelief. You're taking her side? I'm not taking sides, he said firmly. But if what Ellie's saying is true, then there's a serious problem that needs to be addressed. The payment is due tomorrow, I said, addressing Elliot directly since he seemed to be the only reasonable adult at the table. If I don't make it, I lose my spot. And the scholarship. Elliot nodded, thinking. How much is needed? Before I could answer, my mother stood up abruptly. I can't believe this. My own daughter, ambushing me, embarrassing me in public. Mom, please, I begged, desperate now. This is my future we're talking about. A future you apparently expect me to sacrifice for, she snapped. I've given you everything for 22 years. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. With that, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Elliot sitting there, visibly stunned. I'm sorry, I said to him, suddenly feeling ashamed for involving him in our family drama. I shouldn't have done this here. Elliot shook his head. No, I'm glad you did. I had no idea. He pulled out his wallet and placed his credit card on the table to cover their unfinished meal. Let's go somewhere a bit more private to talk. I want to help if I can. I looked at Jade, who nodded encouragingly. Okay, I agreed, not entirely sure if trusting my mother's boyfriend was wise, but out of other options. We ended up at a coffee shop a few blocks away. Elliot bought us all drinks, and we settled at a corner table. He looked tired, older than he had at the restaurant. I want to be clear about something, he began. I didn't know about your college fund. Caroline told me she'd been saving for this trip for years, as a personal goal. She said your education was fully covered through scholarships. She lied to you, I said simply. He nodded, looking troubled. It seems so. How much do you need for the payment? I told him the amount and he winced. It wasn't a small sum. I can help, he said after a moment. Not with all of it, but with some. Hope flickered inside me. Really? But why would you? You barely know me. Elliot sighed. Because it's the right thing to do. And because. He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. I care about your mother, but what she did wasn't right. I don't want to be complicit in that. I can contribute too, Jade added. I've been saving for my coffee shop job. It's not much, but it's something. I felt overwhelmed by their generosity. I can't ask you both to do that. You didn't ask, Elliot pointed out. We're offering. What about the rest of it, though? I asked, doing the math in my head. Even with their help, I'd still be short. I might have an idea, Elliot said thoughtfully. I know someone at Westlake University, an old college friend who works in the financial aid office. Let me make a call. He stepped outside to make his call, leaving Jade and me alone at the table. Do you think we can trust him? I asked her quietly. I think so, Jade replied, watching him through the window. He seems genuinely surprised and upset about what your mom did. I still can't believe she did this, I admitted, feeling the hurt wash over me anew. She's always been a bit self-centered, but this. Some people only think about themselves, Jade said gently. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Elliot returned a few minutes later, looking cautiously optimistic. My friend at Westlake says if you can make a partial payment now, they might be able to work out an extended payment plan for the rest. It's not a guarantee, but it's worth a shot. That could work, I said, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time that day. I have some savings from my summer job. Between the 3 of us, I think we can cover the initial payment, Elliot said, pulling out his phone to check his bank account. And then we'll figure out the rest. Thank you, I said, feeling tears prick at my eyes. I don't know how to repay you both. You can repay me by doing well in school, Elliot said with a small smile. That's all. As we worked out the details, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from my mother. How dare you embarrass me like that? Elliot isn't answering his phone. What did you say to him? This is exactly why I needed that trip, to get away from this kind of drama. I silenced my phone, unable to deal with her selfishness right now. By early afternoon, we had a plan. Elliot transferred a significant amount to my account, Jade contributed what she could, and I added my savings. It would be enough for the initial payment to hold my spot. Elliot's friend at Westlake had agreed to meet with me the next day to discuss options for covering the remaining balance. I should get going, Elliot said, looking at his watch. I need to have a serious conversation with your mother. Be careful, I warned him. She's good at turning things around, making you feel like you're the one in the wrong. He nodded grimly. I'm starting to see that. But this conversation needs to happen. After he left, Jade and I headed back to our apartment. I felt emotionally drained, but also strangely relieved. The problem wasn't completely solved, but for the first time since opening that notice, I had hope. "What are you going to do about your mom?" Jade asked as we walked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I can't just cut her off, she's my only family. But I can't trust her anymore either." "Family isn't just about blood," Jade reminded me. "It's about who's there for you when it matters." She was right, of course. Today had shown me who I could truly count on, and it wasn't the person I'd expected. When we reached our apartment, I was surprised to find my mother waiting outside, sitting on the steps. She stood up when she saw us, her expression a complicated mix of anger and something that might have been regret. "We need to talk," she said. "Alone." Jade squeezed my arm reassuringly. "I'll be inside if you need me," she said before disappearing into the building. My mother and I stood facing each other on the sidewalk. The afternoon sun was harsh, highlighting the lines of strain around her mouth. "Elliot called me," she began. "He says he's helping you with the tuition payment." "He is," I confirmed, watching her carefully. "Along with Jade and my own savings." "You shouldn't have involved him," she said, but her voice lacked the anger from earlier. "This is a family matter." "I didn't involve him. You did, when you spent my college fund on a vacation with him." She flinched slightly at my directness. "It wasn't just the vacation," she said defensively. "There were other expenses." "Like what?" I challenged. "Life isn't cheap, Ellie," she snapped. "The new car needed repairs. The house needed a new roof. And the Mediterranean cruise? Was that a necessity too?" She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. "I've worked hard my whole life," she said finally. "Single mother, climbing the corporate ladder while raising a child. Do you have any idea how exhausting that is?" "I know it wasn't easy," I acknowledged. "But that doesn't justify what you did." "I promised you a college fund when you were little," she said. "But circumstances change. I didn't think you'd hold me to something I said a decade ago." "It wasn't just something you said. It was a promise you repeated throughout my entire childhood. It's why I worked so hard for that scholarship, to make it easier on you." She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "Elliot says he's going to help you." "Yes." "You barely know him. Why would he do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do," I said simply. "Something you seem to have forgotten." Her eyes flashed with hurt and anger. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair, Mom." We stood in silence for a moment, the gulf between us seeming wider than ever. "So what now?" she asked finally. "You take Elliot's money and hold this against me forever?" "I don't want to hold anything against you," I said honestly. "But I can't pretend this didn't happen either. You betrayed my trust. You put your wants above my needs." "It wasn't like that," she insisted, but with less conviction. "Then what was it like? Explain it to me." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know what you want me to say." "I want you to acknowledge what you did was wrong," I said. "I want you to understand how much you hurt me." "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, and for the first time, I saw tears in her eyes. I've spent so long taking care of everyone else. For once, I wanted something just for me." "I understand wanting something for yourself," I said softly. "But not at the expense of your child's future. Not after promising me for years that you were saving for my education." She wiped away a tear quickly, as if embarrassed by the display of emotion. "I'm sorry you're disappointed in me," she said. "It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something." "I'm more than disappointed," I admitted. "I'm hurt, and I'm scared about my future." "Elliot says his friend at Westlake might be able to help with a payment plan." "Yes, we're meeting tomorrow. But even with that, I'll still graduate with a lot of debt." She nodded, looking uncomfortable. "I could help with some of it. Not all at once, but over time. I'll have to adjust my budget." It was a small concession, but I recognized it for what it was, the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing I was likely to get from her. "That would help," I said. "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between us. Years of trust had been damaged in a single day, and I knew it would take time to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. "Do you want to come inside?" I offered finally. "We could talk more." She shook her head. Not today. I need some time to think. And Elliot and I need to talk. About what? About us, she said simply. He wasn't happy about my decision regarding your college fund. He said it made him see me differently. I felt a twinge of guilt. I didn't mean to cause problems between you two. You didn't, she said, surprising me. I did. Actions have consequences, right? Isn't that what I always taught you? Yeah, I agreed softly. They do. She nodded once, decisively. I should go. We'll talk more later. As I watched her walk away, I felt a complex mix of emotions: anger, hurt, relief, and a strange kind of sadness. The mother I thought I knew had revealed herself to be deeply flawed, capable of putting her own desires above my future. It was a painful realization, but also a necessary one. I couldn't change who she was, but I could change how I related to her moving forward. I went inside to find Jade waiting anxiously. How did it go? She asked. About as well as could be expected, I replied. She didn't exactly apologize, but she did offer to help with some of the costs over time. That's something, at least. Yeah. I sat down heavily on our worn couch. You know, all this time I've been so focused on getting into Westlake, proving myself academically, that I never stopped to think about what other lessons I might need to learn. Like what? Like how to recognize when someone isn't as trustworthy as you thought. How to stand up for yourself, even against people you love. I smiled sadly at her. How to identify who your real family is. Jade sat beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. Life lessons they don't teach in any university. Exactly. My phone buzzed with a text from Elliot, confirming our meeting with his friend at Westlake the next day. A small step, but an important one. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to soften, casting long shadows across our small living room. In less than 24 hours, my perception of my family, my mother, and my future had been completely upended. The road ahead would be harder than I'd anticipated, with student loans and damaged relationships to navigate. But I wasn't alone, and perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. Later that evening, as Jade and I were sharing a pizza and discussing the logistics of the upcoming meeting at Westlake, my phone rang. It was my mother. Ellie, she said, her voice sounding different, softer, perhaps, or just tired. I've been thinking about our conversation. Okay, I said cautiously. You're right, she continued, the words seeming difficult for her. What I did was wrong. I broke a promise to you, and I put my wants above your needs. I'm sorry. The apology caught me off guard. My mother rarely admitted to being wrong about anything. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. It means a lot. Elliot and I had a long talk, she continued. He helped me see things more clearly. I've been selfish, and I've justified it by telling myself I deserved it after all the sacrifices I've made. Everyone deserves happiness, Mom, I said gently, but not at someone else's expense. I know that now, she said, and I want to make it right. I can't replace all the money at once, but I'm going to help you. Really help you, not just with words. I've already called the bank about a home equity loan. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. I'm your mother. I'm supposed to help you build your future, not sabotage it. The weight that had been crushing my chest since yesterday seemed to lighten, just a little. What about your trip? I asked. Don't you leave next week? There was a pause. I've canceled it, she said. Well, Elliot and I are canceling it tomorrow. We'll get some of the money back, not all of it, but enough to make a difference for your tuition. Mom, I appreciate that, but... It's already decided, Ellie, she said firmly. It's the right thing to do. And besides... She paused. Elliot pointed out that the memories we would have made on that trip wouldn't have been happy ones, knowing they came at your expense. I felt tears spring to my eyes, partly from relief and partly from the shock of hearing my mother acknowledge her mistake so directly. Will you let me help? She asked, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. I know I've broken your trust, and I'll need to earn it back, but I want to try if you'll let me. I'd like that, I said honestly. And yes, I could use the help. Good, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Elliot says his friend at Westlake is expecting you tomorrow. I'd like to come along if that's okay, to show them I'm committed to making this work. I'd appreciate that, I said, surprised by the offer. Really? We talked a bit longer, making plans for the next day. When we hung up, I felt a cautious optimism beginning to replace the despair that had consumed me since opening that payment notice. Jade, who had been pretending not to listen to my side of the conversation, looked at me expectantly. Well, she apologized, I said, still somewhat in disbelief. Actually apologized. And she's canceling the trip to help with tuition. Jade's eyebrows shot up.
Wow.
What changed? I think Elliot had a serious talk with her. And maybe, I hesitated, thinking about it. Maybe seeing me stand up for myself made her realize she couldn't just steamroll over me anymore. About time, Jade said with a grin. I always knew you had it in you. I smiled back, feeling strangely light despite the challenges still ahead. I guess sometimes you have to lose what you thought you had to find out what you're really made of. The next morning, my mother arrived at my apartment 15 minutes early, dressed in her most professional outfit. She looked nervous, which was rare for her. Ready? She asked as I grabbed my backpack. As I'll ever be. We met Elliot outside the financial aid office at Westlake. He greeted my mother with a quick kiss on the cheek, but I noticed a new reserve in his manner. Things between them had clearly shifted. Tom's waiting for us, he said, referring to his friend in the financial aid department. He thinks he has a solution. The meeting went better than I could have hoped. Tom listened to our situation, with my mother openly acknowledging her role in creating the problem, and presented several options. Between my partial scholarship, a work-study program, some additional grants he thought I might qualify for, and the money we'd managed to cobble together, it looked like I could attend Westlake without taking on crippling debt. You'll still need some loans, Tom warned, but nothing you can't manage with a decent job after graduation. And I'll help with the payments, my mother added firmly. Monthly contributions for as long as needed. Tom made a note in my file. With this plan, we can hold your spot in the incoming class. You just need to make the initial payment today. As my mother handed over her credit card, using funds from the canceled cruise refund, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that my educational future was secure. Pride that I'd stood up for myself. Cautious hope that my relationship with my mother might evolve into something healthier. Outside the office, Elliot checked his watch. I've got to run to a meeting, but I think you two are in good shape now. He gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze. You're going to do great things here, Ellie. As he walked away, my mother watched him with an expression I couldn't quite read.
He's a good man, I said.
Yes, she agreed softly. Better than I deserve, probably. Are you two okay? I asked, suddenly concerned that my actions might have damaged their relationship beyond repair. We're working on it, she said after a moment. He was pretty upset about what I did. Said it made him question my character. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want to be the cause of her unhappiness. Don't be, she said, surprising me. It's good to be with someone who holds you accountable, who expects you to be your best self. She looked at me directly. I haven't been my best self with you, Ellie. I see that now. We all make mistakes, I offered. Some bigger than others, she acknowledged with a rueful smile. But the good thing about mistakes is that they're opportunities to learn and grow. At least, that's what my therapist used to say. You saw a therapist? This was news to me. Years ago, after your father left, I stopped going once I felt stronger. She hesitated. Maybe it's time to go back, to figure out why I've been so focused on my own needs at the expense of yours. It was the most self-aware I'd ever heard my mother sound, and it gave me hope that real change might be possible. I'd like us to have a better relationship, I admitted. One where we can be honest with each other. I'd like that too, she said, and I could see tears in her eyes. More than I can say. We walked across the Westlake campus together, talking more openly than we had in years. There was still damage to repair, trust to rebuild, and difficult conversations ahead. But as we passed groups of students rushing to summer classes, I felt a renewed sense of belonging. In just a few weeks, I would be one of them, pursuing the education I'd worked so hard for. My future hadn't been stolen after all, it had just taken a different path to get here. And perhaps this detour, painful as it was, had taught me something valuable. That I was stronger than I knew, that I could stand up for myself when it mattered, and that family, real family, was defined by actions, not just blood. As we reached the campus gates, my mother paused, looking back at the imposing university buildings. "I'm proud of you, Ellie," she said softly. "Not just for getting in here, but for fighting for what you deserve. For not letting me get away with what I did." "That means a lot," I said, surprised by the compliment. "I've got a lot to make up for," she continued. "And it won't happen overnight. But I want you to know that I'm going to try. Really try." "That's all anyone can do," I replied. "Try to be better today than they were yesterday." She smiled, a genuine smile that reminded me of the mother I'd known in my childhood, before disappointments and resentments had hardened her. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," I said, linking my arm through hers. "When she was at her best." Together, we walked back to her car, ready to face whatever came next, not as the perfect family I'd once imagined us to be, but as two imperfect people trying to find their way back to each other. And for now, that was enough.